What's going on, y'all? This is Mason Thomas, the Living Authentic podcast, where we help people develop and figure out what God had in mind when He sent them to this earth. But today, I've got a very special guest. I'm here with Dr. Jayce O'Neal. He's the pastor of Red Church. He's also a past instructor at Regent University. He's also authored and published many books, some of which we're going to talk about today, and he's got a chance to travel the world and study abroad. So it is my pleasure and honor to bring to you Dr. Jayce O'Neal. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Doing real
How's
well.
your day going so far?
You know what? It started off pretty well because I was able to wear my Michigan University hoodie.
My goodness.
Sorry, everyone. I was not supposed to bring that up. It was part of the introduction as an avid Michigan fan, but he purposely skipped that part because we're going to be spiritual and serious, but definitely don't want to bring up Michigan.
This is what I have to deal with every day, every Sunday. This is what happens when teams that aren't used to winning win. This is what we get. This nonsense. But he's from Detroit, Michigan. He's a huge Detroit fan. He's a huge fan of all sports Detroit-wise.
Sure. Yeah.
So Michigan, huge. Detroit Lions, who lost last Sunday, by the way. But hey, we're not going to bring that up. So
hey, we're just glad that we won a playoff game. So hey, we'll just take the wins where we can get them.
Nice. It's great winner's mentality right there, guys. You know.
You got to start somewhere. You got to start.
Speaking of starting somewhere, give me your journey. Where did you start from? How did you come to the point of you being this person who's sitting in front of you today?
Goodness gracious, that's a big question. Mm-hmm. So where did I start? Well, I was born at a very young age.
Okay, I hope so.
Well, I grew up, as you mentioned, I was from Michigan. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and I traveled all over the place because my dad was a young minister.
Okay.
And so I lived in, I don't know, probably somewhere between 18 to 24 different schools by the time I was in seventh grade.
Okay.
And so so there's a lot of movement in regards to that. I couldn't read as a child, and so because part of that was moving around so much. And so we talked about my doctorate. I couldn't read, and my second grade teacher told my mom that I would never amount to anything.
Really?
And as you just said, I couldn't learn. I didn't know that, of course, on the front end. I found that out about fifth grade, which kind of ticked me off and motivated me. And so, come to find out, part of the reason why I couldn't read is most likely because we weren't staying anywhere. There's no place for me to stay concrete. And so, whenever we talk about the books or the education, that's really part of my testimony. Mm-hmm. It's not that I'm smarter than the average bear. It's just that, God uses all sorts of different types of people.
Right.
Because of my dad's, what he did, we traveled all over the world. And so I got exposed to a lot of different types of people, which was kind of cool. I thought that was kind of normal. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that we didn't have much, because of what he did, the churches would send him around to different things. And I went to school, went to college. Mm-hmm. I flatlined in college. I almost died on a few different occasions. And that kind of adjusted kind of the course of my life, because I grew up and was licensed as a minister very young, probably like 18, probably way before I should have been. Okay. Kind of was burnt out from that very early on, and I decided to go do my own thing.
Okay. So when you're 18, you're in the ministry. Is that more of because your father's in the ministry, so you kind of follow his footsteps, or is that more of a personal decision for you?
I think I probably at the time would have said both. Okay. Obviously my dad being in ministry had a big impact, but I really was drawn to it. I really enjoyed it. It was a challenge. I kind of saw behind all the closed doors, and so I'd say probably at that time it was both, although, I burnt out at it pretty young because of some things that were going on in the places that we were at. And that's where I went to go be an actor. Right. And so I went and did that, and went to college, do all that sort of stuff.
Nice. First acting job, what is it?
First acting job?
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. The first acting thing I can remember would be in church, but that wasn't a job. I didn't get paid for that. I mean, I did the normal salty stuff, and I did like stuff at school. I remember I did this one thing in a large auditorium where I was Thomas Edison.
Really?
I'm like, you never give up, never give up. And the whole time I'm not looking at anybody. I'm waving the wire around.
Right.
I didn't want to look at anybody. First paid job. Goodness gracious. I don't know that I remember that. was probably a commercial I don't want to remember.
Right.
Probably, I would say.
The reason I ask because it's they go from licensed minister to actor.
Yes.
Most people think that'd be flipped. Like you
Sure.
do the acting first, and then later on, it's like your aha moment. So now I want to go into ministry. Why do you think yours was that way?
Okay, that's a good, probably two different reasons. Number one is, I think by nature I'm creative.
Right.
Even though I think I'm an organizational thinker,
Mhm.
I'm also creative in how I approach things. So I grew up around creativity all of my life. You know, in churches there was so many cool opportunities to do some of that stuff.
Right.
Not really at a high level sometimes,
Right.
but how that really connected was at a point in my life, I actually could not speak in public. Like I had a massive fear of speaking in public. So I couldn't read at different points and I couldn't speak in public. And part of that is because the first time they asked me to preach, I got up there and somebody had taken my notes and like I blinked and I was like, I don't know, I was a teenager. I was probably 15, 16 years old. And I blanked and I'm surrounded by all of my friends and two girls in the front row I'm trying to impress. And for years I couldn't talk in front of people. Would not even pray in front of my own family. For me it was a traumatic experience.
Right.
And so there were a few things that actually got me out of that. Because now almost every day I'm speaking in front of people to some degree. A couple steps is, one is I auditioned for a play. Actually didn't audition for a play. I was there with friends who were auditioning for the play. They asked me to read across from people. And then after I did that, they asked me to be in the play. And I don't know if he did this on purpose, but because he knew, I would imagine he did. I always gave this director, his name is Wayne Ruff. I've not talked with him in years, but I don't know if he ever did this on purpose. But the role he gave me, he actually cast me in 3 different shows, and they progressively grew. The first one, he allowed me to improv my opening monologue, which if you're a director, you usually don't do that, especially with a young person. What that did was, on the front end, I could speak in front of people if I wasn't me. Because I was saying someone else's lines. This was a pivotal step because it was a character, but some of it was me because I got to make up some of the lines. Next thing that made a big deal is when I went to college, I did public speaking as a class. Those key moments broke me out of the fear of speaking in front of people. But to this day, I still have moments where I have this, like, where I just, can I do this kind of thing? It becomes less over time, but that's how those things connect to some degree.
I think you're probably the first pastor that I know that has an acting background. Do you feel as if does your creativity express itself in your sermons?
Maybe. I think, see, I look at acting and preaching differently, although a lot of people would connect the two, because I think with preaching, there has to be an authentic connection. Now, obviously, if you're a good actor, there should be some authenticity in what you're doing too, but you're really trying to get in the head of another kind of character, and therefore there's a part of it that may be you, but part of it that's not you. As a pastor, it helped me to be able to know practical things. Like, if you're in a larger setting, I'll give you a perfect example. One of the reasons why TV preachers come off fake isn't because they're fake. Some of them might be, but most of the time it's not because they're fake. It's because no one ever taught them there's a difference of speaking to a large group of people versus a screen. Versus a screen. Because in theater or film acting, if you're doing Shakespeare or musical theater, it has to be bigger, or the people in the back don't know what you're doing, they're not interested. But if you're in intimate theater or in front of a camera, it has to be more subtle because the big stuff doesn't read real.
It doesn't come across well.
So those are things, it taught me practical things like that. I think God used it to prepare me. Without it, I wouldn't even get up on a platform to speak.
I'm of the mindset that if Jesus was walking earth today, he would be a director, because the Bible's full of pictures. Like Jesus gives you impactful pictures that you can take and sit down and meditate on. So I think some of the best preachers are ones who are able to replicate that. Like they're able to use whatever their background may be, whatever upbringing they may have. They're able to use that, connect with a crowd that may not have the same experience, but they're still able to cast a picture in front of them that draws them in,
Sure.
right? And as like in the Bible says, the more you behold, what you become,
Mm-hmm.
right? So as we behold Jesus, the more and more we behold him, the more and more a person becomes just like him, right? So when I think of Jesus, I always think of a director. I love that you have an acting background, right? I think it expresses itself in a way. Because I heard you speak a couple of times, so I think it expresses itself in the way you preach, and you can definitely tell in the way you think. You think outside the box in a sense. Do you think that does that make it hard for people to relate to you, with your background being so different than others?
I think it's probably helped me relate to more people,
Okay.
not just the acting thing, but because my background is so varied,
Right.
it's easier for me to find connections with people just
Okay.
because I think God, I've been told I have a decent memory, so I can I can go back to like specific situations sometimes, like, oh,
Right.
well, how do I connect with this person? Um, I think maybe people who are very concrete and they can only see what's in front of them, they might find it hard to relate sometimes. But even those folks, I can usually find something that I can identify with, because there's certain things I like to be concrete about.
Right.
And I like the idea of, Jesus probably would be creative because he was creative. He was also a hard worker because he
Right.
was a carpenter, and so he probably has some real practical skills,
Right.
but he knows how to communicate.
Oh, for sure. I was talking to somebody the other day, and God is the most creative person ever because He's never repeated the same miracle twice, right? So you have to think, if He's that creative, and we're creating His image. Of course, everybody to a certain degree is creative, and I think sometimes we limit that by our thinking sometimes, but I think we're all just as equally creative. If we sat down and had some time to think about it, we could all become a little creative. One of the things I found interesting, what?
Can I say something to that real quick?
Add in.
Well, first of all, you're right. The first thing God did was he created.
Right.
But what was interesting, they did some studies some time ago where they took people who were not believers.
Right.
And I think this backs up part of your point. And they asked, like, what is the number one difference for those you lived a life without the Lord, and now that you're in a relation with him, what is the biggest change? And I was asked, what do you think they said? Right. And I would have said joy, probably, that there's a stronger sense of joy.
Okay.
A lot of other people say different things, but the number one thing that they saw in people's lives who were changed by Jesus was creativity. They began to believe that anything was possible, which obviously increases hope, which obviously increases love, which I have seen on the mission field.
Right.
In areas where they don't have Jesus, you can see if there's a village that does and a village that doesn't. The ones who does, way more creative.
Right.
Their buildings look more interesting. There's more care for what they do.
Right.
And I find that very, very interesting, that when you come into a relationship with the Lord, the number one thing that people experience is creativity.
It's almost as if tapping into the life source unlocks something.
Sure.
Like it unlocks something in your mind, in a sense, right?
Right.
So I believe that 100%. I'm with you on that.
And it's not always just like painting creativity. So if you're a business person, it may be a creative business idea, or it may be just thinking creatively outside of the box. It may not be like the fine arts, but there's innovation or creativity in it.
I think one of the reasons I'm big on like creativity and innovation is I think the answer to the world's problems isn't necessarily book knowledge. Like it has to be a God idea to solve the issues that the world's going through right now, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why we spend time with God on a daily basis, because when you face these issues, you're going to face, as a Christian, you're going to face so many people from so many different backgrounds. They have so many different problems. There is no book out there that can solve that issue. Like you have to have a word from God spoken into a specific situation to get the God type of results that we're after. And that's exactly what Jesus had when he walked the earth. He was able to speak God's words into a specific situation and get God-like results. And I think that's what we're called to do. But I think the number one route for that would be, you have to tap into the creative life source originally. Like that's what Jesus came back to give us, that connection back to the Father is what we're supposed to have, right? So one of the how would I put it? One of the greatest things about Pastor Jayce that I found out is that he's got the chance to travel around the world. I'm a huge traveler. I got the chance to travel as a child a lot of places, but he's actually got the chance to travel a lot of places and study abroad, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So what was your favorite? Give me a list of the few places you've been first, and then give me your favorite.
Well, I've been to a lot of different places.
Okay.
So obviously you got North America, you got Canada, you've got Mexico, you've got
Okay.
Cuba, Costa Rica,
Right.
Ghana, Israel. And I could go on, but the ones probably if I were to say the number one would be Israel,
Okay.
just because I've been there multiple times now, and I think it allowed the Bible to come more real to
Okay.
me in a very practical way. One of them, as an actor background, one of the issues I always had was when Jesus talked to the multitudes. Well, how did he do that? Because he didn't have microphones.
Right.
So I actually was in the area where they were talking about how he did this thing.
Right.
And I was sitting there and I'm looking at the Sea of Galilee and the sun setting, and my roommate is behind me flirting with a girl. Of course, I'm in college at this point, and I'm really annoyed that he's hitting on this. He's hitting on this girl, and he's doing a really bad job doing it. Like, he was bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like embarrassingly bad. And he's right behind me, and I'm like, could you at least do this where it's not awkward?
Right.
And then I turn around, and he's like 100 yards away from me.
Okay.
And of course, I was young at that time. What I didn't realize was that the mountains around it and the water and the shallowness of the water creates a natural amphitheater
Right.
to where your voice talk. And then I began to realize some of the voices I was hearing were people in boats way far away. And so in just little moments like that, and there were many others like that, it's like the Bible becomes more real.
Right.
And so it was a really powerful experience.
When you say you were able to study abroad, like, what does that mean practically? Does that mean you did all your studies overseas somewhere? Is it anything specific, any specific subject you were studying while you were overseas?
Sure. Well, the context matter of why I did that.
Mm-hmm.
I never planned to go to college. Okay. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. I actually looked down upon it because the culture I grew up in is like, if you did that, only losers do that. That's the culture I grew up, in a poverty mindset. It was just like, those are losers, and they can get, you go from tough to being able to be beat up because you have an education. And so I end up in college because there was nothing else for me to do. I just happened to, I took the SATs because my parents paid for it, but I goofed off the entire time.
Really?
I was trying to, this is probably not what you want to hear, but when we did the SATs, they had the real studious people.
Right.
So I just want to make them nervous. So I went through, and my goal was to answer as fast as I could, and then freak out all the nerds.
Nice.
Just really freak them out.
Did it work?
And they're like, oh yeah, totally worked. But I still did decent on the SATs.
Did you?
I did. And so I went in and I got accepted to Michigan.
Okay.
And it was one of those things where it was not my plan, but at the same time, I was in the middle of a big faith journey. I didn't know why I believed what I believed. Okay. I told you about my heart stuff, but at this season, I had relational issues. I had physical issues. Spiritually, I did not know what I believed, why I believed what I believed, or if I believed in anything. So I started from ground zero. And one of the reasons I studied abroad was to explore, what do I really believe? So I went to Europe to study history, culture, to figure out different cultures. I studied with a leading astrophysicist because he was talking about the beginning of the world. I'm like, well, that's a good place to start.
Right.
Went to Israel because it was a progressive me learning and trying to investigate these things. And so when I went to Israel, it was, okay, is the God of the Bible real? Right. And what version do I believe in? And so that's how I studied in Europe, all throughout Europe, and then Israel, and then abroad because I went to a specialized school, actually Oklahoma University, for this special program with this astrophysicist. So those were the three kind of special things that I did in college.
Okay. Pastor Jayce doesn't know this, but the more he tells the story, like my life story kind of aligns with his in a sense. I'm real big on, similarly to you, I grew up in the church, right? But there was a moment to where I had to find out, is the God of the Bible the real deal?
Right.
Right. And a lot of people haven't gotten to that moment yet. Like, so if you talk to a Christian or a follower of Jesus today, they're Christians or followers for a multitude of different reasons. The only reason a person should be a follower of Jesus Christ is because they had a heart revelation of who he is. Anything else can be shaken.
Sure.
Right? Like, it doesn't matter where your parents were Christians. It doesn't matter that you went to church when you were younger every Sunday. It doesn't matter your grandparents made you go. None of that stuff really matters if you don't have that heart level revelation, right?
Sure.
And that comes at I don't want to say it comes at a specific age, but it comes at a specific point to where I have to know whether this God is real or whether he's not real. And anybody that doesn't have that, you can kind of debate whether they're believers, true believers, heart on a heart level or not, right? So I do find it very interesting that yours came in Israel, like in the midst of was it the most religious tensions place you could possibly be in
It
the
was
planet?
pretty interesting.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
bet it
we were getting, they'd always give us updates. Stay away from this area because there's rumors of like suicide bombers or
Right.
something along those lines. So,
Was it still as bad as it tension wise today as it was then?
well,
Is it still bad? I mean, was it still bad then?
I mean, there's always been tension there.
Right,
Obviously, the stuff that's been going on now, I mean, it's an active thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, though, I mean, to go into, say, Bethlehem,
Right.
or along those lines, or even Nazareth, I mean, it was a whole process, and so I mean that area. I don't know that there's ever not been a time, since biblical times when there hasn't been tension.
Right.
And so, I mean, for example, you're going to baptize people in the Jordan. You got people with machine guns on both sides.
Right.
So it's intense.
Yeah. So a little story. My moment came for all people who follow me already. They already know my story. So I was in prison, and I hit the lowest of the low. Like I said, I grew up in church and all this other stuff, but I hit the lowest of the low. I'm sitting in a prison cell, and I'm like, is this God real? So I'm reading the Bible. I told God, if I find one lie in this book, so I'm not going to believe it. I'm going to throw the whole thing out, right? So for people who read your Bibles, in one place in the Bible, Moses' father is named one thing, and his father's named another name in the Bible. So as soon as I saw that, I closed the book, I threw it down, I said, I got him. It's over with. This whole thing's a lie.
Right.
No lie. I'm in a prison cell, and the TV comes on. Now, in this prison cell, like the pod has a pod TV, right? This is how crazy it is. There's a pod TV. I don't even have my own individual TV. And on this particular day, the preacher on TV was talking about Moses' father, right? And he was like, he specifically said, for all you out there that thinks that the Bible's lying because Moses' father has two different names, it's not. They just called him two different places. It's the same person. And at that moment, I was like, you know what? You got me. He's real.
So you had the Bible
Absolutely.
and kind of a Holy Spirit moment combined together
all at one time.
Yeah.
I bring that up to say, what was your moment at? Was it in Israel that you had those? Because you brought up the moments where
Sure.
Jesus became real with a voice. How did his voice carry and things like that? Where was that moment at for you?
Well, I think that there were a few different moments. There were a few kind of, as I was starting from square one, there was a few things that take stepping stone. Like, for example, when I went and studied with a leading astrophysicist,
Right.
I had a ton of questions for him. So understand, there's only 12 of us in this program.
Right.
All of them are mathematicians or scientists, and there's me, the drama major.
Right.
So I got nominated for this thing, so I felt like an imposter right away.
Right.
Like, why am I in this special program? But I had tons of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And he said this, and he's not a believer. He's a Nobel Prize winner, and he's the one who came up. He was the director of the Hubble telescope.
Telescope. Okay.
Dr. George Smoot, and I asked him all these questions, and he goes, honestly, he's like, it takes more faith to believe there's not a God than there is, because you have to come up with a lot of really big arguments to try to dismiss it completely. And so some of the stuff they answered or said to me, I was really shocked by, and that led me to be like, okay, at least this is not completely irrational that there could be a God out there. So that was a step. Okay. That there was the God of the Bible. Another step would have been when I was in Israel. There's a lot of little things that kind of open up my eyes progressively. Mm-hmm. One of which was, like, as you highlighted, I was looking for discrepancies, and they talked about Mary Magdalene. Okay. And this came a little bit afterwards, but it was more of a confirmation. But there were several things when I was there, and this is the best example I can think of to illustrate all of those that happened when I was there. They always say, well, Magdala is one of the reasons we know the Bible's not real,
Mhm.
because Mary Magdala, we know that people wrote this way after Jesus, because uh, where she's from, Magdala, didn't exist until the Byzantine period or this way later
Right.
period. And so she was at it afterwards. Well, come to find out, they discovered why
Right.
they thought that. And what happened was, where she was from, it's really close to Mount Arbel. It's a big thing over Sea of Galilee. There's a wind tunnel that comes from the Mediterranean Sea,
Right.
and this massive, and it may actually be why the storms and walk on the water in the storm.
Right.
It may be why that happened. Uh, it came and basically flooded and wiped out the entire town.
Mhm.
And they had to move. So they were all basing it off this Byzantine um, place,
Right.
but then they finally found the real place
The real place.
to prove that actually this was the time of Christ, and this is where she was from, and it fit perfectly.
Right.
But the big time happened when I flatlined, and I was in the middle of, and when my heart stopped, the beep, the flatlining beep in the
Right.
hospitals goes off. I'm surrounded by friends in college, and I just go, and I'm very aware of what's physically going on. I'm aware spiritually. There's certain things spiritually that I was experiencing, and I was in so much pain that I wanted to die, and I basically just gave up. I just kind of gave up. But then all of a sudden, almost like a fire of passion, with directed passion, the way I would describe it, is I couldn't physically say it, but I cried out, and I'm like, Jesus, save me. And instantly I came to. Because in that moment, I don't know how to explain it, but the doubts went away, and things just made sense. Like all of a sudden, there was like
All the
in
pieces
that
were put together.
things just put together. And the moment I came to, from that point forward, nothing could shake it.
Right.
I was already in process. I was already kind of there, but that particular moment galvanized it to where I was like, no matter what I go through, I know what the Word of God says. There's all these building blocks, but that Holy Spirit moment also of like, I know what happened. I know what was going on.
That you're talking about is in the Greek language. There's a word called idio. It's EIDO, I believe. And what it talks about, those are the two different words you find in the New Testament for the word know. So there, I forgot what the other know is, but the other know is just like a physical. But the Greek word idio is special because it means an intimate knowledge. I know that I know that I know, and it's been revealed to me by someone that can't be shaken. Like that's what it means, and that's what I believe every Christian kind of expresses it differently, of course. Everybody's story is different, but what they mean is the same thing. Like there's something happened that I know that I know that there's nothing that can happen. There's nothing that can shake it, right? And I think that's the desire that Jesus has for each and every unbeliever to get to that point that you know, right?
Right.
So you're flatline in the hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you wake up. How do you explain it?
How do I
Do
explain
you
it to
explain it
people?
to anybody, or are you just trying to process?
Oh, I probably did. Um, I think that a lot of it started expressed through writing. It was actually in the season I started writing for the first time.
Okay.
I hadn't really written before then, and so part of it started when I was really in despair, and the rest of it came as I came out of it, so to speak. And so um, I was telling all sorts of people. They could see me because there's all sorts of crazy things going on. At one point I was in a wheelchair, and so you can imagine that you're the big strong guy,
Right.
and you have to be in a wheelchair, which I tried to use to my advantage as a single guy.
Right.
Like, hey, I need help.
Didn't
All the
work.
pretty ladies, kind of thing. But at the same time, I did that as a defense mechanism of, this is embarrassing. Like I shouldn't be. So I was telling people all the time, everyone I talked to, and of course some people thought I was nuts, and other people were like, "Well, we know you, so
Right.
that's pretty interesting."
How did so how would I put it? I've I've seen the miracle signs and wonders of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes I have a problem explaining it to people. It's you don't want to turn other like Christians off. But when you get around a person who kind of believes the same thing, it's like, oh, now I can express to you.
Sure.
Like, so is that an issue that you had? It's because that's a traumatic experience. And a lot of people couldn't even relate to, but they also a lot of Christians wouldn't understand it.
Sure.
You know, I mean, there's so many
Right.
Christians out there believe so many different things, right?
Right.
So where is it that you find a place where, or a person to where you can finally say, okay, I can tell this person this, and I don't have to worry about how they're going to feel about it because we kind of believe the same.
Sure. I think in the beginning I didn't care because I just shared it as
Okay.
as it came about, and then as you see people's reactions and stuff, I think just thinking off the top of responding to that, whenever you come to those kinds of things, I try to share as much of those types of things as I can with the person.
Right.
So I don't ever want it to be a barrier to them coming to know
Right.
the Lord. So if I think that that's going to, like, okay, well, I can't have that conversation, then I'm going to share the part of it that I think that can be palatable to them, and maybe even push it a little bit.
Right.
So if someone's going through stuff, I might sit there and say, look, I'm not going through what you went through, but there was a time in my life where I physically and spiritually was dying.
Right.
And this is what God did. Now, I don't go into the other
Details.
specifics. Even in this situation, I didn't go into all of the details of what
Right.
I was going through. But I try to use, because the truth of God there is powerful, even if you don't share all of it.
Right.
If you're in a relationship, you can share the piece that maybe they need in that moment.
Right.
And so I don't feel the pressure to have to share all revelations all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. I mean, there is a freedom when you can share it
Right.
freely and openly. But I think part of the reason people do that is because some people do abuse those things, and some
Yeah,
people do make
sure.
stuff up.
Yeah.
But that, obviously, we have a supernatural God. So
100%. So, and was this in Israel or this was back?
no, this was in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay, this is after Israel then.
In between.
Okay.
So okay, let me go back to this. Israel would have been after.
Okay.
Europe and the science would have been before. So that was like
Okay.
the groundwork stuff.
Okay.
So because I had multiple different procedures at different times.
Mhm.
So I had to, the one that finally got dealt with, Israel was very soon after.
Right.
So I actually went to Mexico on a missions trip and Israel, and it was almost like those were confirmation times.
Right.
The
Okay.
other ones were building blocks, but what happened in Israel, actually dealing with supernatural things, God has a sense of humor about what happened in Mexico. But Israel is where he began to get a lot of the confirmation moments.
Okay. Perfect. You mentioned Tulsa.
Yes.
Tulsa is a hotbed for some of your most famous Christian leaders for a
Sure.
long time, right?
Sure.
So you're talking about the ORUs. You're talking about was it Kent Hagin was there for a while in Tulsa
Yes.
also, right?
Yeah.
Did you study?
Yeah. So you had a bunch of people there.
Yeah, it was a bunch of
Victory
them.
over there and all
Right.
those sorts. Yeah. Church on the Move. There's a bunch of them
Did
over
you
there.
study there in Tulsa?
Yeah, I
also?
studied at ORU. Like I said, I also spent time in Norman and
Right.
in Oklahoma. But yes, I did
How was
study.
ORU? How was studying at ORU?
Well, I went to 5 undergrads.
Okay.
And so ORU, I would say for me, was a desert. Not because necessarily the school,
Mhm.
but as I said, it was in that season, I was trying to figure stuff out.
Right.
And part of it, I wasn't totally living the way I should have been living anyways, which explains some of the desert moments.
Right.
But I'm actually going to be going back there in a little
Okay.
bit to visit for the first time in a long time. And one of my professors is going to be interviewing me like this, and they asked me to process what my experience was like there. So I've already been doing that.
Mhm.
At the time, it was a big challenge for me.
Why?
That it wasn't the school, it wasn't that, and maybe some of it, but some of that wasn't fair. Because I wasn't sure what I believed, where I believed, I was pretty harsh
Okay.
about some people and some of the things that they were doing because I was very skeptical. In
Okay.
fact, one of the reasons I went to ORU was to kind of figure out, is this real or not?
Right.
And I think we can do that. We can be very judgmental towards churches, and it's
Right.
one of the reasons I try to not do that now, because everyone can criticize the church, but the church is the bride of Christ.
Right.
So at ORU, I was definitely the criticizer of a lot of things. Made a lot of bad decisions, made some good friends,
Okay.
had a lot of spiritual moments, but it was an interesting season for me, for
Really?
sure.
Okay. Nice. After ORU, you went where?
I came to Regent University in Virginia Beach.
Now, okay. Now we're going to fast forward all the way back to lovely Virginia Beach.
Yes.
You were an instructor at Regent University.
Yes.
Okay. What did you teach?
Well, I taught a lot of different things. I mean, because of my background, and I had multiple different degrees. They could use me in a lot of things. So I taught leadership and business. I taught
Okay.
acting, film. I taught theater. I did counseling. Did some divinity stuff. They've had me develop some master's program. Master's courses in some of their new masters in divinity courses, and there's a whole list of different types of classes that I taught, and I enjoyed the flexibility that allowed me to church plant because it paid the bills when church planting didn't.
Yeah. I bet. So we're at Regent, but now we're at Red Church.
Sure.
How do we get from there to here?
Well, in there, I met my wife,
Okay.
and so I met her serving. I was leading a small group. She came.
What's your wife's name?
Her name's Erica.
Erica. I want you to know that he wasn't going to mention your name, but I did.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
It's too late. Don't try to cover it up now.
I don't have to. The thing about my wife is she doesn't get upset about that stuff. If I would ever miss a date, which I normally don't because I remember them more than she does, she doesn't get upset about those types of things. So no worries.
She must be a very patient woman. You can tell.
To be married to me, she has to be.
No,
to be married to me. And might I say, your wife probably has to be very patient with you too.
100%. The best decision I ever made.
As an Alabama fan,
I
think that she has to have really a lot of patience. And in fact, when I did joke with them at church one Sunday, she enjoyed that. And,
that is true. She did enjoy that.
Because, Michigan beat Alabama. So what do you do?
It happens. They cheated. That's okay.
And Raven, make sure you keep that into the video. Michigan beat Alabama.
You see what I have to deal with? I come to church to hear a word from the Lord, and this is what I have to deal with right here.
So in the meantime, I realized the mistakes I made at ORU. I plugged into a local church right away. I was there for 12 years, met my wife there. And her and I, partly is because she's also an actress, and there's always a desire in her heart to at least go and check out Hollywood. Okay. Not necessarily to live there, but she wanted to at least see if she was called to do it. And it didn't bother me because all this stuff, I could have acted from anywhere, and I was getting stuff from all over the country in that way.
Okay.
So I felt to steward my wife's calling, and I had my own interest as well. I'm like, we're going to give it a shot. So we went 2 years to LA. And I had been an agent at different times, and when we got to LA, I did security for celebrities and things, and I was writing a book. So I had a lot of cool side jobs when I was there. But in the middle of it, I began to realize I could do this thing. Maybe I'm never super famous, but I saw how the game was played. It takes an average of like 5 years to get an agent there. I had option of free within 3 months.
Okay.
I was getting invited to parties and huge things and auditions and stuff, and I'm like, it's almost like God was showing me what it was like.
Okay.
And I realized that I probably wouldn't be the person I wanted to be if I stayed there.
Oh, really?
And I think it would have killed our marriage and any family we were going to have.
When I think of LA, so I'm from Alabama. Like I said, I traveled a lot, but I've never been to LA. But things that I hear, is it really as dark as they make it out to be, spiritually speaking?
Well, I think LA itself, and look, there's some great people in LA.
Right, of course,
and there's some really great things going on in LA. But LA is a desert, so almost everything there is fake. The palm trees are not from there. The palm trees are imported in. And so there is this persona, like, I think I shared this with you one time. There was my neighbor, how I became a did security for celebrities. My neighbor, there's this guy, big dude, and I'm at least 6'5". I'm not exaggerating. Big guy, built guy. He's banging on the door, making threats. And I didn't know if it was my neighbor or his wife. I'm from Flint. The guy's bigger than me. I don't care.
Right.
And I opened up the door, and I wasn't a pastor at this time. I told him to get off my porch or I was going to throw him off.
Right.
We were on the 3rd floor. He mouthed off, but he left.
Okay.
This gives you a picture to answer your question. It was the guy, and he comes up to me and he's like shocked. And he says, I can't believe, are you a Christian? Why? Because he goes, I already thought, like, when I met your wife and you, I thought you were Christians. But in LA, nobody sticks up for anybody else. Because if you stick up for somebody, you could be blackballed because either they have power or they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody.
Right.
So nobody really protects anybody. So in LA, whenever I see somebody standing up for somebody else, even if I disagree with them, I at least will sit there and say I respect that.
Right.
And like I said, there were some great people, but essentially, like, every person is an object that could open the door for you.
Right.
So it's very easy to not see the person as a real person.
You kind of see them as straws. Like after most people finish slurping their drink out of the cup, they just throw it off.
That's exactly
On the
right.
next one, right?
Well, I mean, some extreme version of this is that there was a mom, Christian mom, who's trying to help her daughter get in the industry. Well, her strategy sent her underage daughter, 16, to the bars to make eye contact, and she got paid to do it. So they were paying underage girls, at least in this particular place, just to be there. I mean, I don't think she said she didn't drink, but the whole point was to attract attention.
Right.
And I'm like, really? You think this is a good idea for your daughter?
Okay.
And so,
was this the norm? Was this like a normal, that type of thinking? Was that normal for them? I mean,
well, look, like every place, you're going to have people a variety of range, and there would be some people that would have very strong issues with that. But will you speak up or not? And it was a very tough place, I think, to speak up.
Okay.
And because it's a very alluring thing. Like in New York, if you and I sit there and go, "Hey, let's get together," and you didn't want to say, "I don't really like you,"
right?
I don't see. I'm not going to help you. In LA, it's like, let's get together. All right, coffee shop on the corner, 11 a.m. I'll meet you there.
Right.
You show up, I don't show up. We meet again, and it's like
the same thing again.
Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot. My bad. Let's do it again. This time Saturday.
Okay.
I don't show up. Okay. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff. You're going to find these kinds of issues everywhere. It's just it's magnified there because there's so much power there, and fame and stuff has a magnifier. Long story short, actually, it's probably not too short at this point.
It's okay. You're okay.
But at the same time, and there may be, I would highlight this. I do know that there are strong Christians out there.
Right.
I just began to realize I couldn't function in that environment to be who I wanted to be.
Right.
And so at the same time, my heart was being moved to ministry because my love for the church started to grow more and more and more. And then I began to realize I'm probably called to be a minister and a pastor because for a lot of other reasons. And so we moved on faith. No job, no place to live. We moved cross country. We actually, when we stopped, we had a U-Haul. I slept on the top bench. Erica slept underneath.
Right.
We didn't even rent a place. We didn't have any money to do it. Came here, went back to our church. We told them we had a heart to plant a church. It took a little bit while, but they got behind us. And we planted the church, and it was a miracle because most churches don't fly. Within 5 years, 98% of church plants die. Right. And we just celebrated 11 years. So
nice. And this is Red Church.
Correct.
Where did the name Red Church come from?
Well, I typically am like a strategic person, and I have like tons of names and stuff, but that's not what happened here. I was literally driving. I got the call from the pastor who was going to plant us, and I'm like, God, it's actually happening. I need a name. And I pray, like, Lord, give me a name. And instantly, Red Church came to me. And I'm like, Red Church? Why Red Church? Right. And then immediately it was kind of like, it's redemption. Essentially, it's like, it's short for redemption. We wanted to be a church that we really focus on reaching unchurched people because there's plenty of other churches reaching church people. Right. And typically with a name like Red, you don't attract a lot of churchy people. Right. You attract people who are like, okay, I'm interested in that. Right. So that's where it came from. There was no strategy to it initially. It was like literally, I prayed about it, and this doesn't happen to me all the time. Right. I wish it did.
Of course, we all do.
But it was like an immediate response, Red Church.
Right. Okay, so we leave LA. We're back in Virginia. We established Red Church. You've been pastor now for 11 years?
Correct.
All right. The biggest problem that you've had since you started Red Church specifically. Give me the biggest problem you've had, and give me the most important piece of wisdom that you've learned through your journey as far as pastoring Red Church.
Wow.
So far.
Well, that's a big question. because it probably depends on what season of the church and what season of life. One of that comes to mind is, when we planted, we didn't have a lot of money, and everyone told us it's not going to work, it's going to fail. And we planted, and we had been, I think, maybe 5 or 6 years, but I knew that, because we were doing a setup teardown thing, I knew that if something didn't change, that we're going to face some pretty big challenges. And sometimes I just have these gut instincts that I've learned to know. It's like the leading of the Holy Spirit, even though sometimes it doesn't seem that way. And I was frustrated because there had been like a season where I didn't feel like I was hearing the Lord. I mean, I was doing devotional time and all the normal stuff. And that's when I became familiar with The Dark Night of the Soul. It's a book, John of the Cross, which essentially all Christians, if you're a Christian at any period, any real believer will at some point encounter a dark night of the soul, and often more than once. And I remember becoming aware of that. I'm like, that's what I'm going through.
Okay.
And I remember walking, and I'm like, God, where are you in all this? We can't get a building, which at that point was a big deal for us. And the banks laughed at us. The realtors took me to a closet and say, this is all you'll ever be able to afford. And I'm like, there doesn't seem to be a way. And so I'm crying out, and I've done this a lot. I've done my walks with the Lord and crying out, and nothing. This particular time, I cried out, I'm like, Lord, when are you going to move? And almost immediately, like the wind was like, wait. That didn't happen the previous times. So it actually jarred me. If you would have been watching me, I'd been walking in and I just stopped. Because that's not the norm.
Right.
That's not the norm. And then I said, how long? Soon.
Okay.
And then I said something along the lines of, can you define soon?
Yeah, of course.
And then there was nothing, But that was all it was, like, wait, and then soon. A miracle, we basically were given a property, our first building.
Okay.
And that was in that season, the dark night of the soul, and then coming out of it and seeing the Lord kind of move. What the dark night of the soul does is sometimes God kind of holds himself back. And what it does is it forces the person to actually love God, whether he gives you anything or not.
Right, genuinely.
We love him for who he is, even if he gave us nothing else. And what the dark night of the soul does is that it causes you to have to rely more on him, not just what he gives us. Because it's so easy to like, God, I want to get married. And then we're married and it's like, okay, you're over here. Or God, I want to have kids, and then it's over here. And so that there's a deepening of my love to where I actually was like, God, if you never give me another thing, I'm going to love you and serve you no matter what.
Right. Your foundation is able to go down. Your roots are dug down a little bit deeper.
And what it also does is it builds endurance.
Right.
It helps you better understand the theology of suffering. At the same time, we serve a loving God who does want to act on our behalf, who does have good plans for us, but we have to have a relationship with him that's just not based on him getting us stuff like a sugar daddy.
I think it makes you unshakable also.
Sure.
In your mind, you're thinking, well, if I can make it through this, like the future troubles that come, they can't shake my foundation.
Sure.
Right. That's what you get when you have not only just Christians, but that's the life principle. Whenever you have a person who's just shallow, their root system is shallow, they'll always fall.
Sure.
Because problems do come. Like there is no Bible verse that promises you no problems for the rest of your life once you believe in Jesus.
Right.
Right. But the reason you have that strong foundation, so when they do come, we're not falling apart like a $2 suitcase. Right. We're kind of sturdy. We're foundational. Like we're here for the long haul.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, even if you look at like 1 Thessalonians, was actually, I'm getting ready for vision night for our church Sunday. And I'm just kind of going through First Thessalonians now, is he's highlighting all these things. The reason why we grow in our faith, the reason why we serve one another, the reason why we encourage one another is we will face persecution.
Right.
It's not that we might face tough times, we will. Right. And the reason we engage the local church is for that time when we do hit the wall. Because there's nothing worse than seeing someone who has a relationship with the Lord, who never plugs in anywhere, and then when they hit whatever they hit,
Mm.
a death in the family, an illness, whatever it is, firing of a job, and then they're like, there's nobody there to help them, and then they blame the Christians for not helping them, and they
You
never
never
really
plugged in
engaged.
any.
Right.
Yeah, you never really
It's
plugged into the
heartbreaking when
class.
you see that
Right,
because
100%. It's like self-imposed also. I
sure,
mean, the reason you plug in is because you have others that can help.
but both you and I both know that most people aren't self-aware enough to go, this is my bad. Most people,
Right.
studies have shown that people, if they see problems in their life, if they can't solve it, they'll blame an external source. The only way, most of the time, people own their own stuff is if they actually see a solution. If they actually think they know the solution, then they might own that issue. But studies have
Right.
shown that if people can't see a solution to the problem, it's their spouse's fault, it's their parents' fault, it's somebody's fault.
Right. That's always a hindrance to your growth.
Sure.
Blaming others is always a hindrance to your growth. I don't think you start growing until you you have to. I'm a big believer in you have to be broken. Like until you're broken, that's when your growth process actually
Sure.
starts. It's very similar to a wild horse. A wild horse is one of the strongest animals on the face of the planet.
Yeah.
But a horse isn't useful to the rider until it's broken.
Sure.
Right. So it's the same thing that God. That's the same thing that God looks at us. Well, we have to be disciplined. Like you have to have self control. These are things you have to have in order to be useful for the kingdom of God.
Sure.
If you don't have them, I mean, we could sit here and highlight all the broken ministers, all the bad ministers out there. I mean, there's a ton of them, but that's only that has a part to do with social media. They magnify the bad stuff. But
Yeah, and they forget about all the ones that are working.
Exactly, all the ones that are broken, all the ones who have the self discipline and things like that.
I agree with you totally that it's very important that humility comes from some level of brokenness at different times in your life, which
Right.
I mean, hopefully Alabama will learn after they were broken from Michigan this season. I think that's a real.
That's a good one.
I think there's hope for them.
It's very humble. That's very humble of you to say that, right? It's very very humble of you to say that. But so what's the biggest piece of wisdom that you've learned since you've been pastoring at this specific church for 11 years?
It's a good question. I think God has definitely built in perseverance. There's so many lessons. I'm just being a pastor has forced me to continually have to grow and learn.
Right.
Continually, to be a better husband, a better father. When you're in a pressure cooker as a pastor, and I love being a pastor, but whenever you deal with broken people, you have to deal with stuff, and there's disappointment, and there's hurt. I mean, there's nobody has more excuses for why you should run from the church because of people from the church might hurt you than pastors because you get it
all the time.
because when you're a leader, this happens at almost any level of leadership, but especially as a pastor, people place onto you their expectations, but they also place onto you their baggage.
Right.
So they place on you, expectations of what they need and what they hope for, or maybe even what they had in the past. They also place their baggage of past stuff onto you as a leader. We do this to people all the time. We project our stuff onto people. We transfer our dad issues, our leader issues, our distrust issues on pastors and other leaders.
Expectations. Yeah.
And expectations. And so I think that would be a big lesson is being able to know and identify which things are really me, because you don't want to sit there and say, this is all you, and sometimes it is all them. So there's a balance of knowing, God, where do I have clay feet? Where am I imperfect? At the same time, being able to identify, I'm not going to own their stuff.
Right.
What that is not me. That is not, because that's not healthy either. That's not humility.
Right.
Humility isn't thinking less of ourselves, as C.S. Lewis says. It's thinking, of ourselves less.
Right.
It's not like, false humility would be like, you're right. Everyone beat me up. You're right. I'm so horrible. That's false humility. Right. Which false humility is the other side of pride.
The other side of the stick.
Yeah. So I think that's a big one. I think God has continually tried to help me be a better husband and father. Like I'm very intentional about how to spend time and trying to invest in them, because a lot of pastors, their families go out the wayside.
Right.
Being in ministry is a challenge. It is a sacrifice.
Right.
At the same time, um, I think, as a my biggest contribution to society is being a father and a husband.
Right.
For example, I tend to be like a high achieving guy. I went after degrees and goals and those types of things. Something changed my perspective dramatically when I was in grad school, because I thought my contribution, the biggest contribution, would be, writing books or speaking in front of thousands of people or whatever. And God has used those things at different times. But I saw this thing called a genogram. Are you familiar with a genogram?
I am.
Okay. So a genogram is basically like a psychological family tree. And I saw how, if you look historically, you look at, say, like a preacher by the name of Jonathan Edwards, and you saw his line. And so a genogram shows you the people, but also the stuff, like what jobs they were, if they're alcoholic, if there's divorce, or so you can actually see patterns and trends over generations. And when you see Edwards, you see judges, you see lawyers, you see pastors, and all these intact marriages. And then you took another person, I can't remember who the person was, but then you see their
Alcoholic.
death, and it was crazy.
Curses.
In this one family, every generation for like 10 generations, the second child died prematurely. I mean, it was crazy. I began to realize that my biggest impact is going to be the home. And that's why when my wife, I knew, wanted to have 4 or 5 kids. So I knew when I married her, I was going to at least have 4, maybe 5. And so we have 4. We lost 2. We had 2 miscarriages. And because one, I didn't want to kill her dream.
Right.
But number 2, I began to realize long term, my biggest impact is if I can raise kids who love Jesus and they can raise kids who raise Jesus, within like 7 generations or 8 generations, you could have impacted 2 to 4 million people.
Multiplicity.
Yeah. And that's just in your line.
Right.
And so, I always remember that.
Right. I'm a big believer. Your first line of ministry should always be your family.
Sure.
But honest question, was there ever a time to where you felt like you were taking ministry home and it affected your family life?
Oh, I'm sure. Most of it's not like, for example, I'm very intentional about time. So, for example, there's certain boundaries I put up. So Friday is our day off. So our offices close on Fridays. So that's also date night with my wife. Okay. So every week we go on a date. And then I try to have, I think it's like I have to at least be home for 4 dinners a week. And I usually do more than that. And the same thing as breakfasts. So I can pray for them, either close the day out or start the day with them. Often I can do both, but I at least want to do one. Yeah, unless there's a big trip. And that helps because at least there's time. And I will tell my kids, look, you're right. I'm not paying attention right now. Forgive me. I've got something on my mind. Give me a couple minutes and I'll re-engage you. So that happens usually when that's happening is I'll zone out and I can see my kids, my daughter. In fact, it happened yesterday. I'm like just staring at the cereal box, just playing a scenario in my mind. Right. And my daughter goes like this to put her head, they're like, Daddy's gone zombie again. And I'm like, sorry guys. All right, where are we at with this?
Yeah.
So I think yes. I mean, most of it, when it happens with me, it's going to be stress where my tendency will be to withdraw. And so when I know that, I don't normally come home and just like, I'm ticked off at the church and I start yelling and stuff like that. I mean, surely after you tell your kids the 3rd time to clean up the room and they haven't done it, voices can go up a decibel.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm more likely to kind of withdraw because I'm just tired. Okay. So I figured out if I can come home, 2 things. I've asked my wife to help me with this. When I come home, when she can greet me with a kiss, not bring the family stuff to me right away. Right. When she just comes with a smile and a kiss, and I can go up to my room for about 30 minutes so I can disengage. Because I usually bring my kids home from school. So I've got them in the car when I come home. I can disengage for 30 minutes. I can transition to dad. And then when I come out for dad, it's not like them, and it's so fresh on my mind that I'm not giving them the attention that they need.
Right.
That's all learning. That's all like, okay,
Growth.
this isn't working,
Yeah.
and just adjusting how it can be done.
That's wonderful. Well, we have a couple minutes left, and on the last couple minutes, first I want to say I'm honored that you would even do our podcast. He's This is actually my pastor, by the way, just so you know. That's why he always messes with me, by the way. But before we close out, I want to give you a couple minutes. Just if you could talk to an unbeliever out there, like what would you tell them about this carpenter from Israel that we serve? How would you talk to them? How would you convince them or sway them in the way of just give them a chance?
Well, I would suppose, depends on who you are. I'm going to give you two different paths, so to speak. For those of you that grew up in and around church or you're familiar with it, um, all of us know that we're not perfect. Most of us would admit we're not perfect. But the issue is that we will say, I'm not perfect, but I'm at least better than somebody else. The truth is that sin separates us from God. These things that we look for in relationships and then they fail and let us down, or we're looking to be successful, or we just need the approval of somebody else, or we just need 1,000 likes on social media. All of that is a symptom of a longing for a relationship with the Lord. Doesn't mean we can't work hard, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have goals. The issue though is if we're not connected with the Lord, none of that stuff will matter at all. And so I want to encourage you that longing is actually a longing for a relationship with your Heavenly Father. And if you grew up in and around church, you may want to be a good person. You may want to do the right thing. You may be even annoyed with the stuff going on in our world. That comes from a sense of justice that we can only really have through our Heavenly Father. And then for those of you that are, perhaps you never grew up in church, that's just not you. You didn't grow up with that. You don't know the reason for that. The current culture assumes that we can just create our own world. We can live our own truth. We can follow our own dreams. We can change our own identity. Whatever it is, this world that you can shape whatever you want. Well, here's the thing. Those things will not lead you where you want to go, because we see this. People have already achieved their dreams to the highest heights, and we've seen that many of them, they don't have a relationship with the Lord. Their marriage crumbles. Many of them struggle with depression, alcohol. You take Ben Affleck. He's like, look, you go through this thing and you get what you want, and then all of a sudden you try to medicate with alcohol and with sex, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. We see this all the time. So if creating our own reality and getting our dreams actually fulfilled us, we would see a lot happier people with a lot happier marriages, but we're not. If we sit there and say, well, if I just had the money, if I just had the right person, well, many people have pursued those things, and the shaping of their own identity, the shaping of their own future hasn't worked out. And here's why. Because we don't have the ability to shape reality and truth. Truth is a real thing, and the source of that truth is our Heavenly Father. And the only way we can reconnect with our Heavenly Father is through Jesus Christ. And then here's the thing. If you really connect with our Heavenly Father through Jesus Christ, you're going to be the most creative you've ever been. You're going to have the best ideas. You're going to be the more real you. One of the things that is crazy is like, I don't want to follow Christianity because, I want to be an original, do my own thing. Well, if that's the case, why does everybody look the same? Those people going away from the Lord are all looking the same. So my last thing to you is, if you're here and the path you're on has not led you where you want to go, there's an alternative. I encourage you to look up Christ. And if you're interested, I'm sure you can reach out to Mason and he can help you with some of those directions of what the next step is.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, if it blessed you, please go ahead and like and subscribe and also share it. Thank you very much.